Hello students, today's agenda is to check homework. We're going to be learning about maximizing profits, and you're going to be able to do 5.4. Today students will be able to apply linear programming with the objective of augmenting profit in scenarios. That means getting the most out of your business. Okay, and we're going to be doing applying what you learned about inequalities, systems of inequality, so that you can be able to maximize your profit. And so we're going to start little by little. And it says, imagine for a while that you're trying to make money. You can produce pizza or hamburgers. Pizza gets you an 80-cent profit. Hamburger gets you a 50-cent profit. So let's say that you're going to be able to sell the same amount of each one with no other information. Well, not other information, but no limits, no constraints. So which one would you prefer to sell? If this is all you have to worry about, well, the one that gets you the most profit will be pizza, because you get 80 cents for pizza and 50 cents for hamburgers, right? So pizza, of course. Which one would you produce? Pizza. However, as you already know, that's not how it works. You have to worry about certain things. And it says, but let's assume that realistically there are some restrictions. Let's suppose that hamburgers take up 2 ounces of meat. Pizza takes up 1 ounce of meat, and you have 600 ounces of meat. So now that's a limit that you have. Okay, you're limited to only 600 ounces of meat because that's all you have in the refrigerator. How many of each can you make? With 600 ounces of meat, how many, if you were not to, let's say that you don't do any pizzas, you don't produce any pizzas, how many hamburgers can you produce if it takes 2 ounces? Well, 600 divided by 2 is 300 hamburgers. And how many pizzas? Let's say that you decide, never mind, I don't want to do hamburgers. How many pizzas can you produce? Well, since they only take 1 ounce, you can make 600 pizzas. Okay, so either this many hamburgers or this many pizzas. Okay. Now, how would you create equations with this information? Well, let's see. For the profit, that will be an equation, and so my profit will be equals to 80 cents for every pizza plus 50 cents for every hamburger. Okay, and of course I can decide how many of each, and including in the production I can decide to make it 0 for one of those. What about for this restriction? Well, I know that I have a total of 600 ounces of meat. Okay, so whatever I use for my hamburgers and pizzas has to be less or equal than 600. How come it cannot be greater than 600? Because that's my limit. That's my restriction. I only have that much meat. I cannot use more than that. So I can use, when it says equal to, it means I can use all the meat that I have or less than that and save some in the refrigerator. Now, how much am I using for the hamburgers from this meat? 2 ounces of meat for every hamburger. So 2 ounces for every hamburger plus 1 ounce for every pizza. Okay? And something else that we have to know, and I asked my students, okay, can I produce, if I had my restaurant, can I produce 5 pizzas? Well, yeah. Can I produce 2,000 pizzas? Well, if there is a big clientele, yeah. Can I produce 0 pizzas? Yes. And I asked when. Well, they say maybe in a holiday, maybe one day they only ask for hamburgers. And then I asked, can I produce negative pizzas? And they said no. So that means that my hamburgers and my pizzas have to be greater or equal than 0. So I can produce 0 hamburgers or more, but it cannot be negative. Okay? There's not such thing as negative items. Okay, so my pizzas and my hamburgers have to be greater or equal than 0. Okay, so this is my set of inequalities that I'm going to be using so far. But let's move on. It says, let's calculate the possible profits for now. Which should we produce? So having this limitation right here, I know that I can produce either 300 hamburgers, 600 pizzas, or something like a combination in the middle. Okay, so what would be the profit for 300 hamburgers? How much will I pay if I have 300 hamburgers? Well, 0.50 times 300 is equals to $150. Now, what if I decide not to produce the hamburgers, but instead I want to produce pizzas? Well, how much would I make for the 600 pizzas? Well, if I multiply, and I'm going to show you so that you can maybe kind of review for the decimals. If I multiply 600 by, that's the pizzas, by the 80 cents. Whoops. This is how you multiply. When you have a lot of zeros and only whole numbers, what I do is multiply the whole numbers. 6 times 8 is 48. I just add the zeros in here, which is 1, 2, 3 zeros. However, when there is decimal places, you look at the decimal places and you have to go back however many places there are in the decimal. So since it's 1, 2, you go back 1, 2. Okay, and so it means that for the 600 pizzas, you will profit $480. So hey, if I don't do any hamburgers and I produce pizzas only, I'm gonna get over three times as much for the pizza. So which should we produce? Pizzas again. Okay. Okay, let's complicate this a bit more. You need to consider the bread. You have 1,000 ounces of bread. You can make hamburgers with 2 ounces of bread and pizzas with 5 ounces of bread. So now we have a new restriction in addition to the other one. So let's see. What does that mean? How many, with this new restriction, how many of each can you make? Okay, a new restriction, something else that we have to think about. Well, if it's 1,000 ounces of bread and hamburgers take 2 ounces, I can make 500 hamburgers. Or if I decide to make pizzas only, and it takes 5 ounces, so 1,000 divided by 5 is 200 pizzas. Okay? Excuse me. And so it says, let's graph this. Well, we need to come up with the inequality for this information, this new restriction. Restriction again, restriction because it has to be less or greater than a certain amount. And we know that we have a limit of 1,000 ounces of bread. So whatever we use from that has to be less or equal to the 1,000 because we don't have more than that. So it has to be less or up to that amount. And for hamburgers, we use 2 ounces. For pizzas, we use 5 ounces. And so this will be our inequality to represent this new constraint, this new limit. Okay. Okay. So let me put this equation together, this inequality together with the other ones that we had before. And so that way we can graph this information. And so if you recall, if not, then you can look at your notes. Whoops. Okay, for the profit, we had 0.80 P plus 0.50 H. This is how much profit I get from the pizzas. This is how much profit I get from the hamburgers. And this represents the total profit. Then I have 2H plus 1P is less or equal than 600. And this represents the meat. Okay. I also have, I have H is greater or equal than 0 and P is greater or equal than 0, but I'm going to write this one first. I have 2H plus 5P is less or equal than 1,000. And that represents the bread. Okay. And if you recall, H is greater than 0. That means that we cannot produce negative hamburgers. P is greater than 0, greater or equal than 0. It means that we cannot produce negative pizzas. We can produce 0 pizzas or more, 0 hamburgers or more, but not negative. Okay? And now we're ready to graph. If you notice, this looks like what you saw in the previous lesson 5.3, where you have a system of inequalities with four inequalities in it. So now we're ready to graph. Let me see if I can put this in here. Maybe I'll make it a little smaller so you can have both in the screen. And so I'm going to create my graph in here, and I will probably, looking at this information, I will probably use up to 600, 500. Okay, so I'm gonna go by hundreds. So 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, and I'm gonna name these hamburgers. You can do it in alphabetical order. Now if you switch this order, it doesn't really matter. You can put hamburgers here and pizzas here, or pizzas here and hamburgers here. For me, it's easier just to put them in alphabetical order, but it won't change anything if you switch them. The graphs will look a little bit different, but the information is going to be the same. Okay, so now that I have my graph, -100. Now that I have the coordinate, I'm going to start, and I'm going to use green for this first one. But first, I analyze my type of equation that I have here. And so I notice that this is in standard form, so that means that I can use the x and y intercepts. In this case, it will be h and p intercept. And so I'm going to use my viscous or crossed eyes. Remember that this is going to be h since it's in the x-axis, and this is going to be p, h, and p. So if p is 0, that means that I divide 600 by 2 and I get 300 hamburgers, which is what we got before. Now when h is 0, that means I don't produce any hamburgers. I produce 600 pizzas. And so I'm ready to graph those 2 points, which is 300, 0. So 300, 0. Maybe I'll just put it in blue. Okay. So the meat, 300 if I do only hamburgers, or 600 if I produce only pizzas. And so I noticed that it includes the 600, so it's going to be a solid line. For the shading, remember to do the testing point. And I recommend 0, 0. So my testing point is 0, 0, and if that's a solution, that means that the solutions or the shades should be in here. If it's 0, 0 is not a solution, then we go to the other side of the line. Okay, so let's see. So 2 times 0 plus 1 times 0 should be less or equal than 600. And 2 times 0 is 0. 1 times 0 is 0. That should be less or equal to 600. And 0 plus 0 is 0, which should be equal to less than 600. Since that is true, that means that this is a true solution, and therefore my shade will be on this side. Okay, I'm just gonna do some lines because we need to know where the shadings meet, where they overlap. Okay, and so I'm going to do the same thing for the other one, the bread. Notice that I'm using a different color just to keep everything organized. And so I noticed again that it's also in standard form, so I can use the x and y intercept. This is h, this is p, this is h, this is p. If I produce, with the bread that I have, if I produce 0 pizzas, I get 500 hamburgers, because 1000 divided by 2 ounces that I need for the hamburgers, it's equals to 500 hamburgers. Now if I produce 0 hamburgers, I divide the 1000 ounces of bread that I have by the 5 ounces each pizza takes, so I get 200 hamburgers. 200 pizzas. And so I'm ready to graph my intercepts. Hamburgers is 500. Pizzas is 200. And so it's a solid line because it has the equal symbol underneath. Okay. And if I can move this a little bit over. There you go. The shade, again, I'm going to use the same testing point, which is 0, 0. So 2 times 0 plus 5 times 0 should be less or equal than 1,000. 2 times 0 is 0. 5 times 0 is 0. Should be less or equal to 1,000. And 0 is less or equal than 1,000. Is that true? Yes, it is. So my shade will be where that point is in relation to the pink line now. Okay, so really fast I want to go over what this means. It means that with the bread and the meat that I have, I'm able to produce any kind of combinations from here. Notice that it includes the negatives. Okay, that's what it means. But in here, if I decide to do, let's say, 50 hamburgers and 400 pizzas, this point refers that I have enough meat because it's under the blue, but I don't have enough bread because the shade for the pink is down here, which is for the bread. So in this area, any combination of pizzas and hamburgers, I have enough meat, but I don't have enough bread. In here, I have enough bread, but I don't have enough meat. In here, I have plenty of both. But then we have two more inequalities that we have to graph, because there is no such thing as negative pizzas or negative hamburgers. So there is some more limits. Let's do that one. And so for the graphs of this is very simple. Let me use orange for H. So hamburgers are greater or equal than 0. Hamburgers are greater or equal than 0. So that means that when we're looking at the hamburgers, you just look at 0 and that's where you chop it. Yeah. Okay, so our graph will be right here. Again, why is this happening? Because there's not such thing as negative hamburgers produced. Okay, and so all my hamburgers are going to be on this side. Okay, positive hamburgers. And so if you notice, so far, this is my limit. I only have two shades in here. In here I have orange, pink, and blue. So let me create a little barrier of what the solution is so far. It's just this area. In here we don't have plenty of something. In here we don't have plenty of something. In here we don't have plenty of something else. Okay, so it's only this region right here. But we still have one more limit, which is the pizzas. And pizzas, it's this line right here. So greater than 0 will be this section. So if you notice, it's going to be restricted to this area right here. But let me graph it. So hopefully you can see the difference. This is teal. P is greater or equal than 0. This is my P, so I got it right there at 0. And it means that my pizzas produced are greater than 0 or equal to 0. Okay, so my shade will be up here. Again, where can you see that they overlap, all of them? In here you have the orange, and So that limits to that section, right? Because there is not such thing as negative pizzas or negative hamburgers. So you will limit yourself to that. And for the meat is from here down. So, but then you don't have bread in here, so it's right here only. So basically, where they overlap is right here for the bread. This is for the meat. So if you notice, those two overlap here. This is for the pizzas, but the pizzas overlap with the meat and the bread in here. And this is for the hamburgers, and this again is where the hamburgers overlap with everything else. Okay, so those will be the overlaps of all these four inequalities. Now, this is new information. It says, in order to optimize a linear function with different constraints, these are the constraints, these are the limitations. The optimization is among the vertices of the constraints. What that means is that we're going to be checking the vertices, meaning the corners, okay, the corners where these meet. And so let's look at the corners. What are they? We have 0, 0. We also have 0, 200. We have 300, 0. And we have this one that sometimes is clear to see because it's aligned to our numbers. Other time it's not as clear. And I'm going to choose them. Right here we see that it's in the middle of 200 and 300, so that's 250 hamburgers and 100 pizzas. Okay, however, if it's difficult to see where they meet, then what you can do is create, with these two equations, you can create a system of inequalities to find that fourth corner. And so let's apply it. So we have 2h plus p equals 600, 2h plus 5p equals 1000. What I can do is multiply by -1 so that I can have opposites in here and be able to eliminate. And so -1 times 2h is -2h. -1 times p is -p equals -1 times 600 is -600. Now we're ready to add the two equations so that we can eliminate. And so this eliminates. 5p minus p is 4p. 1000 minus 600 is 400. We divide both sides by 4, and so p is equals to 100. If you notice, that's what we got. Okay. To find h, we can use any of the equations. I'm going to use the first one here. I replace the p, and the rest I just keep the same. I subtract 100 from both sides, and so 2h is equals to 500. I divide by 2, and so my hamburgers are 250. So that's right there. So you can either see if it's clear what point that is, or you can figure it out by doing the systems of equations. Okay, now he says let's check the vertices. I want you to go back to your equation for profit. because that's now with these corners, after finding these corners and using the profit equation, we're gonna find or figure out which is the best way to combine our resources so that we can figure out what will bring higher profits. Okay, so we have, my equation is P equals, since I have hamburgers here and then pizzas, I'm going to put the equation, I'm going to switch them. So 0.50H plus 0.80P. That's the 80 cents per pizza. That's the 50 cents per hamburger. And first I'm going to check the profits if I produce 0 pizzas and 0 hamburgers. What do you think is going to be? So my profit will be equals to 0.50 times 0 hamburgers plus 0.80 times 0 pizzas, and that's equals to 0 plus 0. So I'm gonna earn 0 profit. Okay. Now what if I decide to produce 0 hamburgers and 200 pizzas? My profit will be 0.50 times 0 plus 0.80 times 200. This is 0 plus 2 times 8. Remember the trick of decimals and zeros? 2 times 8 is 16. 1, 2, 3 zeros. But then I go 2 decimal places back. So it's equals to $160. That's a lot better than this. Let's see. My third point is 300 hamburgers, 0 pizzas. So 0.50 times 300 plus 0.80 times 0. Whoops. And so that's 150. Again, you can just say half a dollar times 300 is 150, or do the same thing. 3 times 5 is 15. 3 zeros and go back 2 decimal places because it's right here. So it's $150 if I produce 300 hamburgers only. And the last one, sorry that I don't have enough space in here, so I'm going to do it down here. I'm going to put the 250 combined with 100 pizzas. So my profit will be 0.50 times 250 plus 0.80 times 100. And so for the hamburgers, I will get $125. Again, 5 times 25 is 125. 2 decimal places. Go back. So it's 125. Plus, when you multiply a decimal or any number with a 1 and zeros, all you have to do is move the space that many times. So it's 80. And so 125 and 80, it's 205. So as you can see, this is going to give me the highest profit. So what does it say? You should use your resources to make how many hamburgers? 200 hamburgers. 250 hamburgers and 100 pizzas, because that's what will bring you higher profits. Okay, so this will give you the highest profits. Well, now you're able to do 5.4, and I hope this video helped.